Ooh boy, head coach Jim Montgomery was not pleased with the Boston Bruins at practice on Monday, and he sure let them hear about it as they got ready for a big game tonight against the Florida Panthers. Let's talk about it on a brand new episode of Locked On Boston Bruins.
You're Locked On Bruins, your daily podcast on the Boston Bruins, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, Bruins fans, and welcome back to the Locked On Boston Bruins podcast. I'm your host, Ian McLaren, and this is a daily show where we discuss all things Spoked B. Today is Tuesday, March 26th, and I want to thank you so much for making Locked On Bruins part of your daily routine, free and available on your favorite podcast app, Apple, Spotify, Pocket Casts, Amazon, also on YouTube. So please do hit the subscribe button on both the audio and video versions of the show so that you never miss a thing. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code Locked On for $20 off your first purchase. Before we get into today's topics, quick reminder, you can find the podcast on social media at Locked NHL Bruins, and you can find me, my hockey thoughts, dad jokes at Ian C. McLaren, although I'm low-key taking a bit of a break over there, posting mostly at Locked NHL Bruins. Our Bruins had a bit of a case of the Mondays at practice, and head coach Jim Montgomery sure let them hear it. They hit the ice with an apparent lack of focus, and it's a trend that had been noticeable in Saturday's loss to the Philadelphia Flyers and a loss 2 nights prior to that against the New York Rangers. And following a few choice words where Jim Montgomery raised his voice and uttered some, PG-13, R-rated language, he stopped practice altogether, made his players line up and do some end-to-end sprints, including the goalies. He just had it. He was sick of the lack of focus, sick of them just kind of getting out there, shooting a couple shots, skating around. He said, quite frankly, quote, "I hated the way we finished the game in Philly." He continued, "It was a good hockey game. It was playoff intensity and physicality. But I don't think I've done a good enough job of teaching the details and game management that we need. And then we weren't prepared to practice today. So that's why we did that." Again, quote, "Those things coupled together, not ready to start practice on time, guys not knowing what we're supposed to be doing. Again, I take responsibility for it, but there's got to be some responsibility on the players." End quote. And good on Jim Montgomery for taking that responsibility on. And looking back at last year, we know the Bruins fell apart in round one, and they can't let that happen again. Jim Montgomery can't let that happen again because it's a reflection on him and his coaching ability and his ability to get players up for each and every game. But at the same time, the players need to take on that responsibility themselves and realize that there was an opportunity to gain 2 points on Saturday against Philly, and they just quite simply did not grab it. Philly was more desperate and more hungry, I guess you could say it. And Bruins captain Brad Marchand believes the message from Montgomery was completely warranted. He said every day it's the players' job to be sharp, be on the ball, and they weren't yesterday. It was a great reminder from Monty that expectations are high. Completely warranted, especially with the games they have coming up and where they are in the season. They need to be dialed in every day. They weren't to start practice. Great job by the coach to notice that and keep the players accountable and get them dialed in. After the sprints, the practice was a lot better by all accounts, and the Bruins were able to dial things in and they are preparing for an important road trip to Florida, Tampa Bay, Washington, and then Nashville and Carolina. Now, there are some breaks in between these games. As we saw Saturday, they played in Philly. They don't play in Florida till tonight, so they were back in Boston for that practice yesterday. Presumably, the same thing will happen as they go to Washington, then maybe come back before going down to Nashville. Either way, it's an important time of year. This is an important road trip. And Jim Montgomery flat out added he doesn't think the team is ready yet for the playoffs. They've got to continue to get tested, and they're going to be tested. He said, quote, "To me, it's as much as team as it is individual. Who's ready to handle big moments?" Goes back to what they just went through over the past 2 games. Checking is elevated in the league. Usually things ramp up after the All-Star break, and it's even gone to another level here over the past few games. They're going up against one of the best defensive teams in the league tonight in Florida. That's going to be a tough test. Do they lose their patience, start giving up odd man rushes, or do they continue to fight and have second and third effort, play the right way, get a greasy goal to win a hockey game? That's what Jim Montgomery is looking for in the Florida game and the Tampa game. Even against Washington, all 3 games are going to test them. The Capitals fighting the Flyers for their playoff lives. Charlie Lindgren has been amazing in net for them lately. And what wins and loses in the playoffs is the details, Brad Marchand added. One mistake can cost you a game, a series, a shot at the Stanley Cup. And it's not something you can turn on and off come playoff time. It's something you need to be really detailed in coming down the stretch. You can't just coast in the playoffs and think you're going to raise your game when it matters most. It's something we've seen this even more over the last few years. Kind of that playoff mentality and playoff intensity begins, like Montgomery said, after the All-Star break, into March, certainly into April. Teams are fighting for their lives. They're playing for keeps every night, and they're competing at different level, and they're already in playoff mode. Just look at the Florida Panthers last year. Barely made the playoffs, but they were in that mode for weeks before the postseason, just trying to fight to get in there, and then it carried over into a run to the Stanley Cup final. When the Bruins are playing like that, they can be a great team. When they get away from it, they're not, and the intensity has to be ramped up. The attention to detail must be ramped up. And that will start tonight against the Florida Panthers, a game we'll preview later on in the podcast. Coming up, we're going to discuss the potential lineup for tonight and why one veteran forward may be on the outside looking in. We'll touch on that here as the podcast continues. I am all about fantasy hockey, and the Sleeper app has been such a find this year because they have amazing deals on daily fantasy hockey. All you have to do, get this, is pick whether players like David Pastrnak, Brad Marchand, Sidney Crosby, Nathan McKinnon will record more or less than their sleeper projections for things like goals, assists, plus, minus, and more in a given game. You can also look at the goalies and pick whether or not they're going to hit their projections on saves. And you can win 100 times your bet by picking the outcome of 8 player stats. All you have to do is sign up for the Sleeper app. Use promo code LOCKEDONNHL. They'll give you a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply, but use code LOCKEDONNHL. See Sleeper terms of use for details and locational availability. Sleeper is our number one choice for daily fantasy sports because with Sleeper, you can win 100 times your cash in daily fantasy hockey contests. Thank you so much once again for making Locked On Bruins part of your daily routine. Free and available on your favorite podcast app as well as on YouTube. And if you're tired of watching Fox Sports or ESPN all day on your TV, maybe you have to turn down the volume with all the shouting, I encourage you to make the switch to Locked On Sports Today. It's a free 24/7 streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Now, once the Bruins got down to business at practice on Monday, we got a glimpse into what the lines might be for tonight's game against the Panthers. And if you saw the lineup, you will see that it appears as though James van Riemsdyk will be on the outside looking in. He had been out of the lineup for 2 of the past 3 games due to illness. And on Monday, he skated as the extra with Jacob Lauko up with Morgan Geekie and Trent Frederick. Johnny Beecher skating with Jesper Boqvist and Justin Brazeau, the JB fourth line. Now, what's the reason for that? Well, quite frankly, Van Riemsdyk has not been very productive over the last quarter of the season. Over his past 20 games since around February 1st, he's got 3 goals, 3 assists for 6 points. A guy like Justin Brazeau, 5 fewer games, 5 goals, 2 assists for 7 points. So he's been more productive in 5 fewer games. Now, you could argue that Jacob Lauko, who's got only 2 assists over his past 12 games, might warrant a seat as well. It's not as though Van Riemsdyk hasn't gotten the puck on net. He ranks 6th on the team in total shots since February 1st, behind only forwards David Pastrnak, Jake DeBrusk, Brad Marchand, Pavel Zacha, and Morgan Geekie. Got more shots than Charlie Coyle, more shots than Trent Frederick, and the same amount of goals. More shots than Danton Heinen, 2 fewer goals. So you can see how some of these shooting percentages are a bit elevated. Brazeau shooting at 17.9%. That's probably not going to hold, although it has been a bonus for the Bruins to get that production out of him. Van Riemsdyk, of course, is a bit older than some of these guys. Quite a bit older in some cases. He's 34. Perhaps showing signs of slowing down a bit after what was a very strong start to the season. Overall, he does have 11 goals, 27 assists for 38 points in 65 games. This is still a pretty good season, especially since he's making only $1 million. He's level in points with Trent Frederick in 7 fewer games. He's got more points than Morgan Geekie in 1 more game played. So they're getting very good value out of James van Riemsdyk, but at this point, it appears as though he is going to take a seat. Now, the defense pairings as well were Matt Grzelcyk, Charlie McAvoy, Hampus Lindholm, Brandon Carlo. That is, barring injury, your top 4. However, the bottom pairing, Parker Witherspoon, Andrew Peeke, Mason Lohrei, Kevin Shattenkirk, those guys are interchangeable, and we'll see who has the upper hand when it comes to playing on the third pairing here tonight against the Florida Panthers. Maybe we'll get some indication as I look at the lines as posted by Fluto Shinzawa of The Athletic. He had Witherspoon and Peeke as the third pairing, Lohrei, Shattenkirk as the extras, with Swayman slated to get the start against the Panthers. And Allmark will go tomorrow night against the Lightning, keeping that rotation going. So James van Riemsdyk, if the Bruins are going to be successful in the playoffs, they need to get depth scoring. They're getting it right now from Justin Brazeau, from Danton Heinen. But it would be important for them to get Van Riemsdyk going in the lineup. He's got that veteran experience when it comes to playoff games. He's got 71 career playoff games. He's got 20 goals in that time, and the Bruins could use him come playoff time. But it might not be tonight against the Florida Panthers, a game that we'll preview here as the podcast continues. Bruins, Panthers tonight in South Florida. It is a massive game, and we're going to preview that here right now. First place in the Atlantic is on the line. Both teams level with 97 points, but the Panthers have a game in hand on the Boston Bruins. So with the win tonight, they could go 2 points up and still have the opportunity to pick up an additional 2 points with that extra game that they have in hand. Now, the Bruins and Panthers have met already this season. We all know the playoff history. Last year, Bruins were up 3-1 in the series and could not close things out. So far this season, they have beaten Florida twice. A 3-2 game back on October 30th. It was an overtime game where Pavel Zacha scored at 3:36 of the extra frame to give the Bruins the win. They played again on November 22nd. Linus Ullmark made 27 saves in that one, as Charlie Coyle, John Beecher, and Jake DeBrusk all scored to give the Bruins the 3-1 victory. Now, Florida, they got off to a bit of a slow start this season, but they have obviously charged up the standings and are challenging for first in the Atlantic, first overall. I talked yesterday about how there's several teams in the mix for top spot in the NHL at the moment. There was 7 teams within a point of first overall heading into last night's action. The Vancouver Canucks, I believe, lost last night, so they failed to move ahead of the New York Rangers. Those two teams tied at 98 points, and then you have the Panthers, Colorado Avalanche, Carolina Hurricanes, Dallas Stars, and Boston Bruins all level at 97 points. Now, the Bruins have played 72 games, so they are a bit behind when it comes to point percentage. The Rangers, Panthers, Avs, Canucks, Hurricanes, Stars, all above Boston in terms of all possible tiebreakers. The Panthers are 5-4-1, however, over their last 10. And they've won only one in their past 5. They lost in regulation to Carolina, to Tampa, to Nashville. They lost in a shootout to the Rangers before rebounding with the win over the Flyers in their previous outing. Before that, they had won 4 of 5 against the Rangers, Devils, Flames, and Stars. They failed to pick up points on the Bruins, who are 6-3-1 over their past 10 games, although they're coming into this one on a 2-game losing streak. Jeremy Swayman, Sergei Bobrovsky have both been excellent in net so far this season. Bobrovsky with a 32-15-3 record, really riding that incredible run to the final last year into a Vezina candidate season this year, carrying the load for the Florida Panthers. He's got a .916 save percentage, just slightly less than Jeremy Swayman, who has that .917 with a record of 22-8-8. The Panthers are led in scoring by Sam Reinhart. He's a 50-goal scorer. He just hit that mark the other day. He's got 83 total points. Matthew Tkachuk, Carter Verhaeghe, Alexander Barkov, all capable of doing damage. And they've added Vladimir Tarasenko since the Bruins last played them via the Ottawa Senators. And again, still deep from there. Evan Rodrigues, Sam Bennett, Anton Lundell, Kyle Okposo they brought in from Buffalo for some veteran leadership. And then on the back end, Gustav Forsling, Brandon Montour, Oliver Ekman-Larsson, Aaron Ekblad. All of these guys are, there's a reason why the Florida Panthers are near the top of the league, because they are a very good, deep team. Sam Reinhart with 4 goals, 6 points over their last 5 games. Justin Brazeau leading the way for the Bruins in scoring over the past 5 with 4 goals. Jake DeBrusk with 6 points to lead the Bruins in that regard. Power plays are pretty similar. Florida's ranked 4th, whereas the Bruins are ranked 8th. And these teams are tied for 7th with identical 81.9% penalty kill rates. The face-off circle, Panthers are much better, rank 11th, 51.4. The Bruins still on the south side of 50% at 49.4. Very similar offenses. Florida's 12th at 3.23 goals per game. Boston's 10th at 3.31. And if you're impressed by Boston's 2.74 goals allowed per game, well, all you have to do is look at the other side and see that Florida is the top defensive team in the NHL, allowing only 2.41 goals per game this season, which is very, very impressive. They rank, tops in that regard. And when it comes to shots allowed per game, the Panthers are only allowing 28, which is good for 3rd, while the Bruins are allowing, you got to go all the way down to 23rd. They're allowing 31.1 shots per game, only 29.6. So again, regularly being outshot. I've talked several times about how good Florida's underlying numbers are. At 5-on-5 this season, they are the number 3 team when it comes to shot attempt differential. They're the number 5 team in terms of shot differential. When it comes to high danger chances, they're a bit further down, maybe 7th or 8th. But expected goals, they're top 5 team in the NHL, and they're getting even better goaltending than the Bruins are this season, which is very impressive since they have Sergei Bobrovsky and Anthony Stolarz as their backup. So they're not exactly stacked as the Bruins are. So all that to say, it's going to be a very tough game for the Boston Bruins tonight. A big matchup, a big test for them after they were called out by their head coach, who was clearly not happy, saying he hated the way they played against Philly on Saturday, hated the way they came out in practice. And I think we really need to see Brad Marchand step up here. He's the captain. It's his first year as captain. They're heading into the playoffs very soon. A bit of adversity being faced here. He needs to step up and set the tone for the Boston Bruins, but in a clean way. Not in a way the other day where he's taking unsportsmanlike penalties, but getting shots on net, scoring goals, picking up his teammates, and helping them secure this win against the Florida Panthers. Again, it's not necessarily about first place, but playing the right way heading into the playoffs. That's what we want to see. We'll be back tomorrow to recap tonight's game, to preview the game against the Tampa Bay Lightning, and to bring you all the latest on the black and gold, because that's what we're all about here on Locked On Boston Bruins, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your favorite team every single day. Please do take care of yourselves and take care of each other, and we'll talk to you again here tomorrow. Peace.